Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. All right, as promised, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt just finished speaking at her press briefing. Let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi for a closer look at what the secretary had to say. Olivia, what stood out to you?
Hi, Reed. A couple things I want to touch on. One, Karoline Leavitt was asked about that new deal with China. I know we talked about that earlier in the hour of what that could potentially look like. We know that the president said this morning on Truth Social that there was a deal. This would include full magnets and access to rare earth materials and things of that sort that the U.S. needs in auto manufacturing. He also mentioned that there would be a lift on he said that Chinese students would be allowed to use colleges and universities in the United States. Karoline was asked about this in the briefing, though, specifically. Take a listen to what she had to say here.
Spoke to his trade team, who did a fantastic job negotiating this on behalf of the United States and meeting with their Chinese counterparts. The president is talking to them about the details of it now. But what the president heard, he liked. China has agreed to open their markets to the United States separately of this deal. And when it comes to this deal, we're going back to the terms that were agreed upon in Geneva for the release of some of those critical minerals and the magnets from China to the United States. And we have agreed to fully comply with the Geneva Agreement as well. So the president is reviewing the details of that with his trade team now, and you'll hear more from him, I'm sure.
And then the second question.
So we heard from Secretary Lutnick as well after those talks in London. He said that the Geneva framework is really what they're working on, but they just had to sort out the negativity. And the fact that they were able to get President Trump and President Xi Jinping on the phone allows them to move forward. He also said that they will start to implement this framework upon the approval from Trump and President Xi. So that was something that stood out, of course, as we've seen market reaction to this new deal today. I also want to point out that Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary, was asked about No King's Day. That's something you and I also spoke about earlier in regards to potential protests we could see on Saturday in response to the 250th anniversary of the Army, that big parade that's being held here in Washington. Take a listen to what she had to say here, specifically about the protests against President Trump that are set to happen that day on Coast to Coast.
Alex, good to see you today.
Good to see you, Caroline. Thank you. You mentioned foreign flags being flown during these protests. There are protest activities being organized for this weekend. Part of it are Democrats saying they want to reclaim the American flag. It's also being titled No King's Day. Does the president see himself as a king, and does the White House expect to see American flags being flown during these protests this weekend?
The president views himself as the president of the United States of America. This is a constitutional republic, and we want to see all of our citizens be proud of the country in which they are given the privilege and the blessing to live. And I think that those images of foreign flags being waved by illegal criminals and by violent rioters in the face of cars blowing up and of flames in the city. I have photos of that here to show you. With this violence and destruction that occurred is an image that Governor Gavin Newsom owns. This is his city, and President Trump saw these images, and he said that is not going to be accepted or tolerated, and hence why he deployed the National Guard and United States Marines who have helped to quell that violence.
If I can ask another.
Sure.
If the president does end up...
Now, of course, Karoline there referring to those Los Angeles protests. But in regards to the protests across the U.S., President Trump was asked about that yesterday, about what they could potentially see on Saturday. He said if there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with force. Reed.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much. Let's now pivot to CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who was in that very briefing room, hearing that line of questioning, joining us now from the White House. Ed, what stood out to you?
The press secretary, in that rather short exchange with reporters, especially short because she doesn't engage us that frequently in the room anymore, doubled down on essentially the warnings the president had issued several times yesterday that if there is violent protest elsewhere in the country, Americans can expect National Guard or Marines to be deployed. Also interesting that she continued to call that she suggested that these LA protests, quote, threaten, quote, American culture and society itself. And she said at another point that we should never allow mob rule to prevail in America. She called the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles shamefully, they said they had shamefully failed their city and state in their leadership in the last few days, and condemned what she called, quote, left-wing riots. So continuing to raised concerns about what have been limited and sort of specific areas and instances of violence in downtown Los Angeles, in that town of Paramount, just outside the city of Los Angeles. But this is now at least the second time today an administration official has come out and suggested that the violence is more widespread and violent and disruptive than Angelenos and our own cameras have suggested. So we will see how the administration reacts in the coming days. Saturday's a big flashpoint. You've got that parade here, of course, in Washington, but then you have these thousands of protests of all sizes scheduled across the country to condemn the president or to protest against him. They are advertised or expected to be mostly peaceful, but seeing how many people show up for those and the hundreds of thousands expected here in Washington to witness this first of its kind military parade will be an interesting contrast, and certainly one the White House will be monitoring closely.
What struck me, Ed, is the President of the United States saying protesters will be met with force. He did not draw a line between protesters or protesters who turn violent. He just said protesters.
Yeah, and there was an attempt to get some clarity on that from Karoline, and she didn't necessarily provide the distinction, but suggested, of course, the president believes in the First Amendment. If that's the case, questions wouldn't be raised if perhaps he himself reiterated that more often, and that's part of why those questions were being asked. But you're right, he had said protesters, not violent, not non-violent, just protesters generally, and of course that is a First Amendment protected action. So again, watch in the coming days as these kinds of events are held in big cities across the country and across the country on Saturday in towns big and small, how local, state, and federal authorities respond.
That report always stand a little taller when I share the screen with you. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.